It's a late night edition of another field botany lecture. So let me lull you off to sleep by discussing the Malvids, our other major clade of rosids, eudicots, generally with free petals. We're going to be discussing 4 families today: the Anacardiaceae, the Brassicaceae, the Malvaceae, and the Onagraceae, each of which is in a separate order here. Lots of other cool plants in this group that we're really not going to talk about. I guess some ones that I think are really cool in the Myrtales is Myrtaceae, which is like eucalypts, huge in Australia, of course. The Melastomataceae, huge in the tropics. My goodness, Rutaceae in the Sapindales, that is the citrus family. Any others that are striking my fancy? Caricaceae is the, oh no, what is it? Tropical fruit. Anyways, I should quit while I'm ahead. Let's get to the work at hand, shall we? Okay. All right, we'll start with the Anacardiaceae. Common name is the Sumacs. These are found throughout the world. There was a fun little Twitter thread, what's the cutest sumac? I represented for the one in Colorado, the main one that we'll talk about. These plants often are really stinky, especially if you rip the leaves. They have a lot of phenolics in them, kind of irritating sap. But beyond that, they're really beautiful, I think. The leaves are always alternate and compound. So Roost Glaber that we see here, boy, this reminds me of like the Midwest and roadsides. You would see this everywhere. We do have this in Colorado. So this is one of the bigger species. They have very small flowers that have kind of a disc at the base. So these are showing, including the mango flower in here. So we have certainly temperate representatives in Colorado, but there's also really cool, kind of much more tropical crops, including mango, pistachio, and cashew. And the technical term for all of the fruits in this family are one-seeded drupes. So 5-merous flower with a superior gynoecium. Okay, here's what we have for the most part in Colorado. So the main species that I want you to know, oh, it's hiding here behind my thing. Oh, I'm gonna do the thing where I hide this. Okay. Is Roost trilobata or skunk brush sumac. This is a very common shrub in the foothills ecosystems right here in El Paso County. So the leaves are compound and they're trifoliate. So there's 3 leaflets and they have this lobing on the edge. You can maybe confuse them with Gamble's oak, but they have 3 leaflets as opposed to a much more loby leaf with more than 3. In the spring, they have these lovely little yellow flowers, and the rest of the year, there is the one-seeded drupe, the little kind of fleshy fruit that you see there. It actually is very much like a mango if you think of it right, and a very important food source for many of the creatures in our area, and certainly has lots of uses by indigenous communities, including for food. In this family includes the spice sumac, which is a really important component of lots of spices and preparations of food in the Middle East, as well as kind of North Africa. It's delicious. The real bad one is poison ivy. So happily, for the most part, people are not going to have any sort of allergic reaction to skunk brush, but you very well might react to poison ivy. We have the western species of poison ivy here, but it's going to do the exact same thing to you that the one out east does as well. Poison ivy's leaves are going to look a lot like sumac, but they're not going to have kind of the dentition as regularly. It's not generally going to be a nice big shrub. The trick with poison ivy is it's highly variable in its habit. Often it's kind of a little herb on the ground, very nondescript, frankly. Sometimes it starts to kind of grow a little bit taller and woodier, like a little subshrub, and they do turn into quite formidable vines, particularly in the South where I used to live. So be aware. And again, if you have a reaction to poison ivy, especially like over time, you might develop an allergy to mangoes or pistachios or cashews. Okay, next family is the Malvaceae or the mallows. Yes, marshmallows originally are made with kind of mucilage derived from one of the many species that's like a wetland growing mallow. Really important family worldwide. One of my dearest friends is the global expert on Malvaceae of Madagascar. So there's so many cool species there that she got to study. Cotton is in this group, super important. And it's a close relative of chocolate as well. We have species native here in Colorado. So all Malvaceae share having leaves that are palmately veined. They could be simple or compound, but it's always palmate, like you see here on the two lower hibiscuses. The sepals are what are called valvate, not overlapping. So this is actually one of our native genera, Spheralcia. And can you kind of see how like the sepals look like they were like sewed together and they don't overlap at all? They kind of look like there's like a little puncture where they come together. That's what that means. The whole family, when it has trichomes, they are stellate or star-like, meaning many individual hairs originating from a single point. So palmate leaves, or at least the venation, and stellate hairs. So very starry little family. And this is a very fun character to look at with your hand lens in the field. Okay, the family has lots and lots of stamen, and they are often fused entirely at their bases. That would be monadelphous into a staminal tube, which surrounds the style. So if you see in that lower right hibiscus, there's a whole bunch of stamen with perfect fusion of the base of their filaments, and out from the middle of that comes the style with the stigmatic lobes. So lots of those, lots of gynoecium and that fusion there. So here's kind of two of our local ones that we have. We don't have that many species, but I think it's a pretty important family globally. A weed that you see a lot in sidewalks, Malva neglecta or mallow. I think it's actually quite pretty. And my favorite native species, Spheralcia coccinea, or the Scarlet Globe mallow, a kind of early summer herb of the foothills ecosystem. You can often identify it just with its leaves prior to flowering. When they have fruits, it looks sometimes like, if you think of like a wheel of cheese sliced like a pie all the way around, like all of these little individual fruits kind of popping out. Okay, next family. We are trucking right along in this late night edition of Field Botany. The Onagraceae, or the evening primrose family. Not that big of a family worldwide. Unlike some of the other ones we've talked about, it is most species diverse here in Western North America, which is cool. It has a really important role to play in the history of science. Some of the very earliest geneticists who worked on plants worked on Oenothera, the genus here of evening primrose, even before they worked on the white lab mouse of the plant world, Arabidopsis, that we're going to talk about next. So Oenothera is one of the genera I would like you to know. This family is 4 Maris. So this and the one we're going to talk about next, Brassicaceae, are both 4 Maris. But there's some pretty good ways to tell them apart. This one is epigynous and has a very well-developed hypanthium. Many of those, as the common name suggests, do bloom in the evening. There's lots of really cool like hawk moth and evening pollinators in some of these groups. So sometimes in the morning, you'll see them kind of deflated. Their petals are all done. But if you were to be out at night, they can often get to be like dinner plate sized. Okay, some other important plants in the Onagraceae include, again, problems with common name, the what I would consider the true fireweed, the genus Chimerian and Gustafolium. And this can just blanket whole fields, particularly in the high country, in the mountains, in areas that have been burned. The story of, again, ages me, but in 1988, there was a huge fire in Yellowstone National Park. And I lived in Montana. And we went there, maybe it was the next year, if not 2 years later. And I just remember all of these burned forests were covered then in blooming fireweed, which was really striking against like the black charred stumps. But that's a pretty beloved plant. A really tricky genus is Epilobium, or the willow herbs. I asked Jen Ackerfeld what's the hardest group she's ever like made a key for, or hardest to ever key out, and she said it was the genus Epilobium, which was interesting to me. This particular species of the many that are found here is actually one of the worst weeds in Colorado. It looks so sweet, right? But it is on that noxious weed list A. But you see the tiny seeds splitting out of a capsule with lots of hairs. These can really take over, particularly in wetland ecosystems. And the final family is going to be the Brassicaceae, or the mustard family. This is a very large and globally important family, particularly for all of the different crops that come from it. So broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, kale, canola oil, that's what that big yellow field is there, bok choy. So many of the, super healthy cruciferous vegetables come from here. You may remember there's some families that we allow old names to persist, and that this is one of them. The crucifery is the Brassicaceae, and that is indicative of the cross. And so 4 petals arranged in a cross is one thing you can associate with this. The other little plant that's shown here is Arabidopsis Thaliana, which is the white lab mouse of the plant world. It is a very small and unassuming plant. When I co-taught with an Arabidopsis geneticist, he would always show like a slide of these little plants living in petri dishes. And it was like Arabidopsis in its natural habitat. Like they are tiny and they go through their life cycle very quickly. And, their whole genome is known and has been known for a very, very long time. And now what's cool is people, kind of leveraging all of the genomic information from Arabidopsis. You can apply it to all plants, but in particular, it's been applied by botanists I know to really understand the evolution of those cruciferous vegetables and all the things that make us so healthy from them. Okay, so 4 petals, like the Onagraceae, but this one is going to have 6 unequal stamens. It's going to lack a hypanthium. What do I mean by unequal stamens? Well, there's going to be 2 kind of on the outside that are shorter. So you get like 4 tall ones, which you can kind of see in the right picture. And then there'd be 2 little shorties kind of tucked to the side of those. And yep, lacking a hypanthium for sure. So the fruit structure is what's really exciting in the Brassicaceae. Like the flowers are all there's kind of a limit to how exciting Brassicaceae flowers can be, in my modest opinion, but I do think the fruits are super cool. Okay, so the gynoecium is composed of 2 fused carpels, and in the middle there's a very thin membrane to which the ovules are attached. This inflorescence on the right is lunaria. I'm trying to grow this in the greenhouse, so we'll have like giant bundles of this to play with. But on the left, there's some other examples of some Brassicaceae fruits and that have opened. So hopefully you can see kind of like this clear membrane that persists when the outer caps of the carpels have come off. Okay, so the fruit is technically a capsule that peels off the 2 outer carpel walls to expose this papery membrane. The scientific name for that is the septum. And it is held up by kind of like a thin wire around the outside, and that is called the replum. So kind of the outside, like an eyeglass frame, I think of it, which is kind of weird. Now, we have, so that's like the diagnostic fruit feature of the Brassicaceae. And then you can batch all Brassicaceae fruits into two types, siliques or silicles. And I remember sleek, silique, which are long and skinny, and then silicles are the much more squat, nearer to round form. So what's going on there? Siliques are flattened contrary to that septum, to that inner membrane. So that's what's showing here. So we have the red center, and then you push it that way, and that gets that long, skinny balloon in cross section. Silicles, in contrast, are flattened parallel to the septum. Okay. So that would be like looking at the ones in the very middle of this kind of page here of diversity. So you don't have to really understand what's going on with the septum, but be able to quickly identify, is it a silique or a silicle? Those are often very key features in Brassicaceae keying, as well as hair features. I had you guys look at that in the field. Okay, many Brassicaceae in Colorado are weeds, including really bad weeds. You go to like an old lot or some area that's like pretty nasty, especially in the spring, chances are the main weeds you're going to find are going to be Brassicaceae. So here's two different weeds, Descarania and Lepidium. One has a sleek, the flicksweed here growing out of it. And then the pepperweed has a silicle, which is much rounder and kind of tiny little meh flowers on both of them. Here's some of our, worst of the worst Colorado noxious weed list. Lepidiums, this giant inflated kind of brassica, and one that's really beautiful. It's called Dame's Rocket. Got cut off there. That's the one on the right with the beautiful purple flowers that are very showy. So those are ones to get rid of if you have around. There certainly are lovely, wonderful native species of high quality. Here's a couple that are pretty important. The wallflower, Erysimum, Protensis, the one on the right. It can be yellow to kind of orangish, depending on the population. And it's quite lovely. It really lives on like really harsh terrain slopes. And then the one on the left is Stanleya Pinata, or Prince's Plume. This one has really long, weird flowers for Brassicaceae. It's kind of interesting. I've seen it around Colorado Springs some. The Navajo certainly have a name for it, and it is edible, has edible fruits for them. And it's an interesting one because it can tolerate soils with a lot of selenium, which is something that a lot of plants can't tolerate. So identifying populations where there's lots of Stanleya can often be indicative of a place to mine for selenium, for whatever that's worth to you. And that is all we are going to do for today. Hooray, we have made it through the rose ids. You could say we're at halftime and give yourself a pat on the back. Hooray.